One day, my buddies decided to test my courage by daring me to explore this old, decrepit building that had been abandoned for ages. You know the type. The kind of place that gives you the heebie-jeebies just looking at it. Well, being the guy who never backs down from a dare, I couldn't resist. So there I was, standing in front of an eerie asylum. The moment I stepped through those creaky doors, I could feel the atmosphere change. It was like a sudden drop in temperature, the classic cliché of ghost activity. Yet a notable chill is to be expected of an abandoned building. With nobody around, the place hasn't seen heating for many years. So the temperature drop wasn't all that jarring. What was more of a concern was my flashlight. It barely pierced the darkness, so I could hardly see where I was going. The sense of unease steadily grew from here. As I began exploring the building, I considered turning back. I'd fulfilled the dare simply by entering. My pride was intact, there was no real need to continue any further. Yet I'd only been in a few minutes, and I knew such a short stint wouldn't win over my friends, so I continued onward. My torchlight led me to a half-collapsed doorway which revealed a humongous room. I could tell this not only by the fact the torchlight seemed to go on, but also by the echoing of my footsteps. As I entered the threshold of the room, I looked around and immediately noticed what once looked to be a lavish vase sat on a cabinet, and I approached to get a closer look. As I outstretched my hand to pick it up, I heard a faint scurrying from the other end of the room. I half jumped out of my skin and dropped my flashlight. I quickly dove to pick it up and pointed it into the darkness, frantically scanning for the source of the noise. It revealed nothing. If my torch was stronger, it might have been more useful. Needless to say, I'm over this little exploratory dare right about now, so I turned to go back the way I came. This time I hear scurrying to the side of me. I stop dead in my tracks, motionless, and slowly point my flashlight to the side. Nothing. I can't see a damn thing. I hold for a second for any sign of movement, but the room is still. Had I imagined the whole thing? I once again turned back to get the hell out of there, and this time I heard scurrying to the other side of me. Okay, this is creeping me the hell out at this point. It dawns on me that I could be surrounded. I've heard something at the end of the room and on both sides of me. What if there was a group of things cutting off my means of escape? My torch is useless, and I can't see what's going on. Best I turn it off, I thought. It's not helping me out, and it's giving away my location. I start briskly walking to the half-collapsed doorway where I entered, and not even a second after I take off, the vase smashes onto the floor. This jolted me into survival mode, and I sprinted like a man possessed, crossing the doorway and aimlessly trying to retrace my steps at 100 times the pace I entered. I turned back every now and again, and I was certain I could see something moving in the shadows, but I wasn't sure, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out. After running into a few walls, I finally noticed the daylight pouring in from the entrance, and beelined it to the door. I could hear the distinct sound of footsteps growing closer as I made my final sprint, but I made it, leaping out of the doorway into the safety of my friends. They appeared startled by my sudden appearance, probably because I came out so fast and I was panting and wide-eyed. After a second of looking at one another, they burst into laughter. "Dude, you look like you've seen a ghost," one of them said between fits of giggles. I was still catching my breath, but I managed to stammer out, "There's something down there." They just waved it off, convinced I had exaggerated the whole thing. "Come on, it's just an old spooky building," they said. "You're such a wimp." I knew arguing my case was useless, and any sense of desire to impress my friends had long since dissipated. I was just glad to be back in a place I could see properly. To this day, my friends still occasionally tease me about the ordeal, and I explain my story of events whenever they ask, but I don't think their opinions will ever change. Can't say I'm surprised. If it was one of them telling the same story, I'm sure I would have the same reaction. Hey there. I wanted to tell you about my adventure last weekend. I finally worked up the courage to explore an old abandoned asylum. It's something I've always wanted to do, but I've always been too afraid. However, somehow, this time, I managed to talk myself into actually doing it. I parked my car a little way off from the asylum. It was a gray, overcast day, the kind that sends shivers down your spine even without a spooky location like this one. The walk to the building gave me time to clear my head and collect myself, but if I'm honest, the anticipation was killing me. The building looked like a relic from a bygone era, windows boarded up and graffiti covering its faded brick walls. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and entered the asylum through a creaky side door. The air inside was damp and smelled of decay, not exactly what you'd call welcoming. I got out my phone and toggled on the flashlight feature, which was surprisingly effective. As I walked further in, the sound of my footsteps echoed through the empty hallways. It was eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I wished I had brought someone with me for a little extra comfort, perhaps some kind of weapon. The place had seen better days, that was for sure. Broken furniture, shattered glass, and peeling paint were everywhere, and the silence was only broken by the occasional drip of water from a leaky ceiling. It was the kind of setting that sends your imagination into overdrive. I turned a corner and found myself in a room with a large, cracked mirror. I shone my flashlight on it, and for a split second I thought I saw a shadowy figure standing behind me. I whirled around, but there was no one there. I chalked it up to nerves and kept moving. As I explored deeper, I stumbled upon a room that was different from the rest. It was cleaner, almost untouched by time. There were a few chairs lined up against the wall, and a dusty old desk in the corner. On the desk, I found a stack of old patient files. I couldn't resist the urge to flip through them. The files were a window into the asylum's dark past. While I knew it was a massive invasion of privacy to trawl through these files, I just couldn't help it. After all, haven't we all wondered about what truly goes on in mental asylums? This place seemed to have it all. Attacks on staff, suicides, ominous messages written in feces. I couldn't get enough of all these interesting documents. I spent another 15 minutes learning all I could and was particularly intrigued by one man who had been there longer than the rest. The file said that he had never spoken a coherent word to anyone since he was admitted. He also barely moved, opting to sit in the corner of his room clutching his teddy bear tightly while babbling to himself. Can you imagine that? Gives me the creeps. I wonder what became of him. I continued my exploration, checking out every room I could. Most were empty, but a few had leftover furniture. As I approached what I imagined to be the main hall of the asylum, an inexplicable sense of dread flooded through me. I can't explain why, as this place has been unoccupied for almost 50 years. Nevertheless, I pushed through the fear, and then suddenly, I heard a noise from somewhere deeper in the asylum. It was a faint, eerie sound, like a whisper being carried on the wind. It was tough to make out where it was coming from, but my curiosity beckoned me to follow it, so I headed in the general direction with my phone shaking in my hand. As I approached, the whispers grew louder, and I could almost make out words that spoke of pain and despair. I rounded another corner and came face to face with a door covered in scratches and gouges. It felt like the whispers were coming from behind that door, and my curiosity got the best of me. With trembling hands, I pushed it open. Inside the room, it was chilling. The words "help me" were written over and over on every free surface, even the ceiling. How did anyone manage to write up there? After scanning around, it was clear the room was mostly empty. There was only one piece of furniture, an old rickety bed against the far wall, and on it lay an old tattered teddy bear. My mind instantly snapped back to the man I read about. Was that his bear? It kind of looked like it, but I couldn't tell. His was well kept, but this one, it was heavily discolored with a missing ear and a loose eye. I decided to approach for a closer look, but a sinister sensation came over me. I was paralyzed by fear and unable to get any closer to the bear. I recoiled back for a sense of relief and just stood there, perplexed by the situation. I really wanted a closer look at that bear, and when my curiosity is piqued, it's tough to look the other way. So to the horror of probably anyone else listening to this, I slowly approached the bear once more. The sinister sensation returned, but this time I fought through it, determined to achieve my goal. Just a meter or so from the bear, I think I've done it. The sinister sensation was probably my mind playing tricks on me. And that's when I felt an icy grip on my neck. Instinctively, I swipe out in front of me, but nothing is there, so I dive desperately backward to escape the grip. Thankfully, it disappears, and I sprint back through the asylum as fast as my legs will carry me. What a harrowing experience. Even when I exited the asylum, I'm so distressed that I can almost still feel the icy grip around my neck. I head home and reflect on what happened, trying to make sense of what I felt in that creepy room. The sinister sensation is one thing, I can chalk that up to my overactive imagination. But the ice-cold hand around my neck? I'm having a tougher time explaining that. I'm even considering going back to get some answers. I know it sounds dumb, but I'd like to know what really happened. Perhaps I need to revisit the room with all of the files. There could be some answers I missed in there. I've never been one to be convinced by supernatural stories. As a man of science, I feel that there is always a reasonable explanation for unexplainable events. It's just that we lack the insight to be able to explain how they occur. That being said, up until recently, I'd never witnessed a supernatural event for myself. And now that I might have, I find my outlook shifting slightly. I know what I experienced, and I'm leaning toward the cause being supernatural in origin. My story begins on a night out with my friends. We had decided to go out Friday night after a tough work week to unwind and talk rubbish. It was fun and exactly what I needed to relieve my pent-up stress. After one too many, we got talking about supernatural happenings and we each discussed our take. While my friends were convinced of the supernatural, I took the opposite stance. Each of them had experienced unexplainable events firsthand, so they were sure that the supernatural was real. While they understood my take, they felt I was ill-equipped to chime in as I had never seen anything remotely supernatural before. To rectify this, they suggested I go to the abandoned hotel on the outskirts of town to experience the supernatural for myself. The place was incredibly run down and had been scheduled for demolition for, I don't know, around 17 years now. But for whatever reason, the demolition had never gone ahead. Not long after it was boarded up, kids started to break into play and cause what damage they could. It was scheduled for demolition after all, so they couldn't get into much trouble. However, on the most recent known break-in, 4 teens went in, and only 3 came out. In the coming days, the police explored the entire hotel but came up empty. The 4th teen was never found. It was very tragic, and the 3 teens seemed very shaken up by the whole experience. They refused to talk to anyone about it. Word of the disappearance quickly spread around the neighborhood, and people were quick to brandish the hotel as haunted. To my knowledge, nobody has ever gone in there since. My friends were convinced that the rumors were true, and explained that it was the perfect opportunity for me to see the supernatural for myself. I had to disagree. The child was more likely abducted than anything, but they wouldn't listen. In any case, I'm not stupid. There was clearly something dangerous at the hotel at one point, and even if it wasn't the supernatural, I didn't want to unnecessarily expose myself to it, even if it had likely long since left. I tried telling this to my friends, but I got called chicken and all sorts. They ended up betting me $500 that I wouldn't last a night in there. This was an offer I simply couldn't refuse. The child disappeared over 3 years ago, so I was convinced there was negligible danger, if any, and certainly worth $500. The conditions were that I had to enter the property no later than 7 p.m. and leave no earlier than 8 a.m. I agreed and said they had better get my money ready. I eagerly said, "I take crypto or cash, whatever works best for you." And with that, I went home and started packing a bag in preparation. Snacks, my phone, a portable charger, a flashlight, anything I might need. When 5 p.m. came, I headed out. I didn't want to be late. Upon arriving at the abandoned hotel, it was just as dilapidated as I remembered. A shame, really. They really needed to get on with tearing this building down. I walked around the perimeter of the place a few times to figure out the best way to get in. The front door was impenetrable, and every window was boarded up tight, probably as a result of the teen going missing. However, I did spot one window not too high up with a wooden plank missing. I knew that was my best way in. I stacked a bunch of wooden crates and managed to grab a hold of a pipe. After testing it with some force, I was confident it could take my weight, so I used it to get to the window. At first, I didn't think I was going to fit through. I'm not the skinniest guy, but after a few minutes of shifting my body around and sucking in tight, I was in. I opened up my bag, grabbed my flashlight, and shone it into the dark corridor. What a mess. The teens had really done a number on the place. There was debris everywhere. What the stuff had originally been, I had no idea, but it was scattered all across the corridor. Before venturing in, I decided the first logical thing to do was to remove another wooden plank from the window. If I needed to get out quick for whatever reason, this window wasn't going to cut it as it was. Fortunately, I foresaw this and bought a hammer with me. The plank screws came out without much issue, and I placed the plank on the floor beside the window. I had a quick explore of the rooms on my level, and each was in the same sorry state. Almost everything in the room was destroyed, and there was a thick layer of dust and grime on every surface. How disgusting. Fortunately, it was only one night I had to spend. Having completed my checks for the rooms on my level, I decided to call it a day. There was little point in exploring further. I decided on room 17, which was in the best state of the lot of them. I closed the door and precariously attached a bell to it. Now I knew this was overkill, but it doesn't hurt to be safe than sorry, right? If the door opened for whatever reason, the bell would fall and alert me. Not that I'd have much time to react, but it would give me some peace of mind. I picked up the dusty old duvet, which was littered with God knows what, and shaked it vigorously to give myself something fitting to sit on. I then laid it back on the bed and sat down. The bed was a bit stiff, but it would do. I looked at my watch. It was just past 7 p.m. Thank God for my phone. That would help me pass the time. I flicked through Instagram for hours without issue, and then when 10 p.m. rolled around, the strange happenings began. It started with what seemed like a distant wailing. It was only for a second, but it made me curiously avert my gaze from the video I was watching. I tried listening for further sounds, but the hotel seemed lifeless except for me, so I continued scrolling through Instagram. This time I got to 10:55 p.m., and similar wails echoed throughout the building, but much louder this time. Now, I had definitely not imagined that. I cautiously removed the bell from the door, opened it, and peered along the long, narrow corridor. Nothing. Same thing on the other side. It was empty. At this point, I was a little shaken, but I was still resolute about my intentions to stay the night. $500 is a lot of money, and nothing too crazy had happened yet. My outlook would soon change. The next hour was uneventful. No more wailing. I chalked up the earlier sounds to my mind, playing tricks on me. With the time sitting at around midnight, I figured it was time to turn in. I set my phone down and slid under the duvet for comfort. The bed was surprisingly warm given the lack of heating. I half expected I'd doze off in 15 minutes as usual, but the reality of where I was staying gnawed at my mind and prevented me from getting to sleep. I decided some soothing music might help, so I put in my earphones and played my chill playlist from Spotify. It took another good hour, but I eventually managed to doze off. But this was short-lived. At 2:15 a.m., I was immediately awoken by an extreme cold that seemed to pass through my body. Startled, I sat bolt upright and turned on my torch. There was nothing in my room, but boy was I shivery. I directed my flashlight to the door, and there the bell still hung, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just a momentary immense chill that made my hair stand on end. I snuggled back under the covers and quickly warmed up. Before I knew it, I was asleep again. But as before, this sleep did not last. Just 33 minutes later, at 2:48 a.m., I was awoken by footsteps. As a deep sleeper, I'm shocked I heard them at all. This was when the reality of my situation became very real. I lay on my bed motionless under the covers, as if whatever it was would hear me if I moved a muscle. The steps were slow and sinister. I held my hand over my mouth in an effort to silence my breathing and tried to listen to where the sound was coming from. At first, It wasn't clear, as the echoey footsteps seemed to reverberate off of every wall. However, after focusing intently, I could tell they came from above, the very next floor. As I lay still, half frightened out of my skin, I heard the distinct creak of the floorboards overhead. Whatever it was walking down the corridor. My mind began racing at 100 miles per hour. Who is that? Why are they here? Have they been here the whole time? So many questions, and no answers. The floorboards continued to creak until the mystery individual was right above me, and the creaking ominously stopped, as if the person in question knew I was directly beneath them. It remained dead silent for a short while, until the footsteps continued until they disappeared past the scope of my hearing. When I was sure the individual was long gone, I sat up and grabbed my bag. It was best to get out of there now. Clearly, I'm not safe anymore. However, as I approached the door, I looked at my watch once more. 3:02 a.m. Just 5 more hours until I win the bet, and the $500 is mine. After a short mental struggle, I convinced myself to stay. However, I wasn't satisfied staying where I was. The footsteps stopping right above me gave me the creeps. I decided it was best to set up in the room next to the window where I entered. Room 26. That way I could make a quick getaway if I needed to. I quietly crept out of my room and tiptoed to the room in question, barely making a sound at all. Being as alert as I was, I knew the possibility of getting any real sleep was out of the question at this point, so I decided to sit next to the door for maximum security. Nothing was getting in with me there. That didn't stop me from trying to sleep though, and a few times I nearly managed some shut-eye, but my head would jolt upright as soon as I realized. However, during one of these phases where I was almost dozing off, I was forced wide-eyed not through my own means, but through a loud thud on the door. My heart started racing uncontrollably, not knowing what I should do. What started off as one thud turned into a barrage, and I sat helplessly with my legs bracing the impacts to keep whatever it was out. The impacts were incredibly powerful, and I struggled to stay firm as the door continuously ricocheted off of my back. Then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. No more thuds. And whatever it was that was after me slowly walked back down the corridor. Horrified at what had just happened, I used my foot to hook my bag while still blocking the door, and I equipped my hammer, grabbing it tightly. The bet was well and truly over now. Something had come to get me, and the only reason it hadn't was because I was lucky enough to decide to sit next to the door. However, I was too scared to move from the spot. Beads of sweat trickled down my forehead, and I was breathing fast and deep, almost hyperventilating. Over the next 15 minutes, I managed to calm myself down and come up with a plan. While I was just beside the window, seconds away from freedom, I couldn't bring myself to open the door. What if it was there? Sure, I'd heard it leave, but I never heard it approach me on this floor, and that meant almost anything was possible. While the logical side of my brain said it was a crazy person and I was half asleep, the other said it was probably some haunted spirit and who knows what it can do. These ideas bounced around in my brain, and I came to the conclusion that whatever the case might be, I shouldn't take the risk of leaving the safety of this room. At the very least, I should wait until morning. With the sun up, natural light would stream through the half-open window, and there would be no need to rely on my torch. So sit still I did. Every minute felt like hours, and I was so eager for this nightmare to be over. A few times the footsteps returned, this time much further away, but I remained where I was, set on leaving after the sun was up. Yet the most terrifying occurrence was yet to come. At 5:43, a distant shrill scream echoed throughout the hotel. And this was followed by fast and thunderous footsteps heading toward its direction. In mere seconds, I heard a large crash, followed by loud thumping and squelching. It was then I decided to change my plan. What I had heard sounded like murder, and it rattled me to my very core. With the sounds emanating from much deeper within the hotel, I knew that I had plenty of time to escape. Screw being quiet, I opted for speed. I flung open the door with my hammer in hand and dived straight to the window. Despite the horror of the whole experience, I lingered on the windowsill momentarily and stared into the darkness of the hall. I noticed the loud thumping had stopped, but after a brief stint of silence, thunderous footsteps roared toward my direction. Instinctively, I turned and jumped towards the pile of boxes I had used to help me scale the hotel, opting to miss the pipe altogether. Luckily, I landed uninjured. I looked back at the window I had jumped from, expecting something to present itself. It had been running toward me after all. However, nothing showed. I headed back to my car and drove home, reliving out the sequence of events in my mind. There was no doubt something was there in the hotel with me, but what it was, I had no idea. This meant I couldn't be sure whether it was supernatural or entirely normal and explainable. While I was happy to be safe and sound, this irritated me somewhat. The whole point of the bet was to claim the $500 or prove to myself that the supernatural was real, and I'd come away with neither. The next day I met up with my friends, and they were keen to hear about my experience. They, of course, instantly claimed a spirit was haunting the hotel, but I was quick to brush off that there was no evidence for that. As promised, I handed over the $500. My buddy tried to convince me to go double or nothing, but I hard passed on that. Supernatural or not, that night was the scariest night of my life.